It can be scary when you think about how much of our so-called personal and confidential information is actually accessible in so many places and by so many different people and organizations. You need to learn what's being done with this information and how to keep yourself secure. Welcome to My Connected Life with Tyler Cohen Wood. When you're in control of your data in cyberspace, you feel all the more secure. Now, here's your host, Tyler Cohen Wood.
Host Tyler Cohen Wood. And today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about social engineering. What is it? Why does it work so well? And what can we do about it? And today we have three special guests. We have Scott Schober, my sometimes co-host, cybersecurity extraordinaire. Marilise de Villiers, the founder and CEO of Roar Coaching and Consulting, best-selling author, behavioral change consultant specializing in finance, technology, and cybersecurity awareness, culture, and talent. We also have Rob May. He's an MD, founder of ramsack.com. He's a UK ambassador for cybersecurity with the IOD. He sits on several advisory boards and is an award-winning international keynote speaker, cybersecurity author, and he has very unique taste in t-shirts. Welcome, Marilise, Scott, and Rob. I'm so happy to have you guys here.
Yeah, and great to be on.
It's great to be here indeed. Hello.
Hi there.
So I have a statistic here. In 2021, 98% of successful cyber attacks were caused by social engineering. And at the same time, social engineering threats also rose by 270% in 2021. What is going on?
I think one of the things that accelerated the problem last year is new normal. I hate that term, but everyone knows what that is, right? And I think the dispersed workplace, people working from home, all sorts of new problems, new ways of attack happened, and people had time. People are working in a different way, and that, you know, those boundaries between secure IT in the workplace and us always being connected and always online are very much a reality and a part of this issue, I think, in terms of why the numbers have increased so much.
I mean, as a behavioral consultant, Marilise, do you think that some of this has to do with you know, to tack on to Rob's point, with the stress, the anxiety that has been brought on by really COVID and this shift to this new work environment, and perhaps maybe even people are more afraid, more exposed, so they're more likely to fall for one of these attacks?
I think that's absolutely spot on, Tyler. I think that's exactly what I was going to build on what Rob has just said, because people have also lost those work-life boundaries, and what we have seen is a dramatic increase in work hours, and of course that goes hand in hand with loss of attention span, you know, loss of ability to think clearly. So there's a lot of mental fog, and I think all of that's contributed to people just going at such a pace and not thinking clearly and not taking that moment to stop and think before they perhaps click on a malicious link.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I could add to it too. I was just thinking myself, I almost fell for this morning in that I had three different Zoom interviews today, and I was setting up the test one earlier, and I went on the link and I had multi-factor authentication set. And I said, you know, this is so annoying. Why don't I just take this off? It'd be a lot faster, a lot more convenient. And then I said, stop, wait a minute. What do I talk about all the time? So I think, again, we are part of the challenge. As humans, we tend to be complacent. We tend to be lax when it comes to being secure. And we think we're the exception to the rule, when it's something as simple as connecting on Zoom, or it could be something a little bit more where we're connecting on our bank account or a secure login. We let our guards down easily. And I think it plays in so nicely the the human element with social engineering. So these social engineers will now try to exploit our natural tendencies, our innocence, our trust, and as both have really well expressed with this new norm, this work from home, work remotely environment, we have less time and we have to accomplish more things in some ways. And to do that, you tend to cut corners, and cyber criminals love that. That's where they can move in and exploit it every time.
They just have to find one hole.
That's it.
And you know, I mean, I actually almost fell victim to one of these attacks a couple of years back, where, and I mean, it wasn't even a sophisticated attack. It was a very simple one. And I came very close to falling for it. And I was like, well, why did I do that? And I realized, you know, I was in a really bad place. I was sick. Our dog of 13 years had just died. And we make this assumption that everyone's always at their best. And I was not at my best. Fortunately, I did not end up clicking the link, but I almost did. And I mean, I don't really know what the solution is, because the social engineers, they're very, very good at what they do. And to Scott's point, to all of your points, you know, social engineering really relies on fear, people's good nature, and urgency.
Yeah, it does, but I think it's more than that, because I think what social engineers do is get you to act typically in a way that isn't good for you. And in order to do that, as a social engineer, they need to fill enough pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that you're making a decision using your subconscious brain rather than your conscious brain, so that you're on autopilot. And you're more on autopilot at different times, you know, and whether that's because you're dealing with loss or because you're tired or whatever. If I'm a cyber criminal and I can plug enough pieces of the story that it just seems okay, you know, you hear so many stories of people who were nearly scammed.
Yes.
And they were on a phone call and they were going along with it, and then all of a sudden they think, hold on, that's not right. And then when they stop and the person on the other end gets really angry because you're stopping them doing their criminal activity, that point where you stop and you think, hold on a minute, that's the second that your conscious thinking has kicked in and you're no longer on autopilot. Up until this point, everything's felt normal and it's felt okay. You know, and I think that plays into.
I mean, that's a great point. I mean, it really is. And, you know, we've kind of been in this situation for a long time. And, you know, we also have to take into account too, the stress of having kids at home, or the stress of really anything, because right now, as humans, we are under more stress than I think we've ever been before, at least in my lifetime. And it just compounds the problem. And now we're starting to see, you know, a lot of hybrid attacks. Can we talk a little bit about some of those?
Well, I had one this morning I thought was interesting, not to myself, but I had a friend actually call up, and they received a malicious link from a text, and they claimed to me, they said, it's okay though, because it came from Apple and I'm using Apple devices. And I said, well, hold on one second. I said, before I say anything else, don't click on the link. And they said, oh, no, it's okay. I already clicked on the link. And I went, oh, and of course it was somebody that was sending a series of texts, giving a sense of urgency that their device was potentially affected with malware. We've heard the story 100 different ways spun. But I think this is a type of interesting attack because they were using some social engineering. They were doing it through a text, which is a little bit different. And this individual made the connection. Well, I have an iPhone, an Apple device. It's from Apple. It's spoofed, so it really looks like it's from Apple with the number and everything else. It's convincing. And they gave a series of texts giving a sense of urgency. So this was kind of a little bit of a different spin on other attacks that I've seen, but to the point where they actually clicked on it. And then they were actually going on the App Store. And that's why they called me, because they wanted help in finding the right program to make sure they can get the malware off their phone. And I said, stop. I says, you're not buying any program today. It's a complete scam. Don't click anything else. Delete that immediate link, so on and so forth. But interestingly enough, they were so worried. And again, they're dealing with health issues, as you talked about, Tyler, stress in life, technological issues that they keep getting bombarded with scams, but they convince themselves it's not a scam. So when you see that sense of urgency and all these other factors, any little tell or red flags, it's really important to stop and don't click on stuff. Don't take it to the next step. Try to qualify. And if you're not sure, that's okay. I always tell people, I'm glad you called, but stop what you're doing. Call a trusted friend, call your father, call your buddy that's in the IT department, call somebody that knows cyber a little bit, call the company, call Apple. Apple, do you actually send text messages and tell me that I have malware on my phone? So I think when we look at a lot of these things, look at our situation and don't be overwhelmed by our stress. It's going to happen anyway, but if we could just stop and not take that the next step into the scam, because usually we're going to fall victim at some stage, as was mentioned earlier.
I've recently seen a sort of type of attack where, they text or send SMSs to the parents saying, your child, pay over £1,000 now, $1,000 now. So as a parent myself, I think, if I get a text message like that, I would just be completely like, what do I do next? And I would be completely like, just pay the money because my child is in danger. So I think there's so much exploitation and manipulation. So there's such a dark and bad side to all of this as well.
There is. And that's such a horrible thing too. What is it called? The kidnapping ransomware. Where you get and I've seen this too, where exactly what you just said, they'll get a call. Sometimes it'll appear to come from your loved one's phone number, or maybe not. And the thing to do in that instance is ask to speak to the kid or to whoever the loved one is, and at the same time have someone else try contacting the kid or the kid's school, because that way you can rest assured before you send any money. Because again, it's like you said, it's that urgency and just taking a step back and saying, okay, you can even have a code word with your loved ones, with your kids that nobody else knows. And, that's a good determination of if it's real or if it's not. But that's such a scary situation to be in, because when you think about it, if you're going to be getting a call like that, they're going to be asking for some type of cryptocurrency, I'm assuming, and not everybody has cryptocurrency. So what do you do in that situation?
Well, a lot of times they'll actually provide you some support and help so you can go obtain cryptocurrency.
Well, that's so nice of them.
Yeah, so they're very, very nice. And they'll even have a 1-800 number oftentimes to step you through it. There's how-to videos, how to go buy cryptocurrency. They'll help you locate a Bitcoin ATM machine. So I think they're breaking down all of the roadblocks so they can have a successful scam or a cyber criminal can follow through and actually obtain the money. And they're also able to pivot quickly. I noticed in one case where it was targeting my grandparents, instead of trying to get them to send cryptocurrency, they said you could simply go to a local Target and get a wire transfer form and fill it out and send it. So, why? Because they realized, oh, here's somebody elderly. Let me try a different approach that is likely more successful. And guess what? While they were in line with that wire transfer form, because they were in an assisted living facility, the 10 people behind them that were also seniors all had wire transfer forms. They targeted 1,500 people in the same facility with the same scam. So you see how effective it is when people are innocent and trusting, especially the elderly. They might take it to the next step, but cyber criminals are smart enough to pivot and say, okay, let me not push cryptocurrency because 9 out of 10 elderly are probably not going to have cryptocurrency or be able to easily get through the technical hurdles to obtain it and pay it. Let's do traditional wire transfer. They have a bank account. We can make it work that way. So little things that I think that are important just to be aware of, so we don't fall victim, and let our loved ones know as well.
And I think also one of the things that always strikes me is, for the cyber criminals, this is their business. And some of these businesses are huge, sophisticated businesses, and they're clever. And the reality is, the training that a social engineer goes through is no different to a lot of the training that you put, your sales teams through in large corporates, understanding how to influence somebody, understanding how to use profiling in your communication in order to get a sales message across. We do that in corporate world. Social engineers do that just the same. It's a business, and a lot of these businesses are very, very successful businesses, and understanding the tools that they use and the tricks that they use, and there needs to be a greater understanding that phone numbers are so easy to spoof.
Yes.
I can make it look like I'm calling from your daughter's school, or that I'm calling from within your business when I put a call into the IT department. That's not difficult to do, but there still isn't that general understanding. Not, and to Scott's point, not within our families and our loved ones, and we need a more general understanding that this is part of the problem, isn't it?
I think it's also really important is the terminology. And one thing I think, when I've studied and I've talked to a lot of very successful people that can socially engineer themselves through a situation, I think about Frank Abagnale Jr. Catch Me If You Can, that movie that probably many of your listeners and many of us have seen. I had the privilege of meeting him and chatting with him for a while on different occasions. And it's interesting, he was very successful, and he was more of what I call an old school social engineer person that could manipulate it, but by using familiar jargon. So if I was going to pretend I was an airline pilot or something, I would start to use terminology. I can go on Google, or I'd watch a movie or read some books and learn, deadhead and a Boeing 737, wheels up, and familiar terminology or acronyms that are focused to that industry. So the person that you're trying to target, it builds credibility. And suddenly, once you hear 2 or 3 terminology used in a sentence in our industry, if somebody says a DDoS attack or something like that, we say, oh, they must understand what cybersecurity is. So we're all guilty of this, but that's when, again, we got to put the red flags up and stop a little bit and break it down and say, okay, are they really an expert in this area? Are they really from the airline? Are they really calling from the bank's fraud department? I've had that call many a times. And then I simply ask them a few questions, and then suddenly the phone hangs up. And so, we want to be careful. Just because somebody says they're from something and they rattle off a bunch of familiar acronyms, or even a successful social engineering scam, they do their homework. They gather a little bit of information about you. They maybe get the last 4 digits of your social security number. They look up, how's the weather there, Scott, in New Jersey this morning? Hey, I'm with the Bank of America fraud department. We've got an alert on your account. Last 4 digits of your social security number. I just need to confirm a few bits of information so I could make sure no fraudulent transactions go through. And then suddenly you're like, oh no, was my wife shopping again? And they skimmed the card. Hold on, what information you need? I'll be happy to help you. So it's the fast talk, familiar terms, and the confidence that they can portray that convinces all of us if we're not real careful.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the statement analysis, the way that people will type to kind of mirror what they're supposed to be. And, I've even seen it. If you have you communicate with, say, a friend all the time on text or on social media. Hackers are even starting to, take the words, the terminology, the way that people phrase things, and if they're pretending to be that person, to come back to you with that same terminology. And I think about it like this. You guys know this, Scott. You definitely know this. I don't use any punctuation in my text messages. It's just like jumbled words, but they're there. And if suddenly you got a text message from me with like perfect grammar, that should be
That's not Tyler.
But it's these little things. And I think, and Marilise, maybe you can help with this. I think that subconsciously we pick up on that stuff.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that, you've mentioned that example, because it is very important to look for a change in behavior. But of course, you don't know the bad guy on the other side, so you don't know, but it's looking for, and also being alert, always being alert, I should say, and on your guard for these discrepancies, these unusual anomalies coming up, and I guess that's why there is this absolute need to be on your guard 24/7. And it makes it so hard. I mean, I've recently seen a very mature organization do a phishing simulation where way too many people actually clicked on the link, and this was straight after they've done an awareness campaign around spotting phishing attacks. And it was a huge disappointment for them, but it reinforced that message of being on your guard 24/7. And that's the key thing, and the important thing, and the difficult thing. And it kind of links to what you said earlier, Tyler, about the expectation to always be at your best, because let's face it, we're not. Most people are not, because we're just stressed out of our minds. And so what Rob said earlier, which is really fascinating to me, is this, and sort of light bulb moment for me, is around the sort of, we need to know the tools. We need to be more familiar with the methods and the tools. We also need to be more familiar with the psychology and understanding how our personal resilience also play into this.
What a great point. But yeah, I mean, definitely our personal resilience. I love that. I may steal that line. I mean, it's really, I was thinking about this too. How many times a day does the average person have a social engineering attempt made on them? And I was thinking about this. I get texts from UPS consistently that click here, your package is delayed. And, I don't click on it, but I get so many of those. I get at least 3 spam calls a day. And I don't even want to go through like email or social media, because there's some there too. So how many times a day do you think a person gets a social engineering attempt? 10?
I don't know. It's huge, isn't it? And the other thing is, if you're, because some of it is, look, it's a numbers game, and the criminals are just throwing loads of stuff out there, knowing that a big chunk of people aren't going to click, but they don't need many people to click in order to get it. So to one extent, it's a numbers game. On the other hand, if somebody's targeting you and they're pretending to be you, and they're calling, your, a service provider to try and hack your account or whatever, and the first service operative that answers the call isn't cooperative, they just hang up and they call again, and they get to speak to somebody else, and they're piecing it together. They're getting bits of the jigsaw. So ultimately, it might be the 8th call, and it's the 8th different person, but they've now got enough information to get through, and now to compromise your account. And that's happening too, for sure.
I always like the stat that from a phishing scam, why do they keep doing it? I always wonder. I did some research, and there's over 80,000 people every single day that click on the link that's attached there in the phishing scam, which dispenses particular malware, often ransomware. So the bottom line is, to kind of what Rob said, it's a numbers game. It works. They're going to keep doing that until people stop clicking on it or use junk filters or something else. So we have to be aware of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. I mean, and I can think of, because oftentimes people say, well, who cares? I don't have anything to lose, but that isn't true in the slightest. I know a gentleman personally who had his identity stolen, and these people went out of their way to go get a driver's license in another state in his name. I mean, this guy's life was almost destroyed. And I mean, I know this is an extreme version of it, but he almost got divorced over it. He got a health condition because he was so stressed out. He actually said, I contemplated suicide because they took everything from him. And it's really horrible. And he just fell for one scam. So, I mean, there's definitely tools that we can use to kind of help prevent this. And, I really want to kind of go around about that discussion when we get back from our break, because, we're not always at our best. Like we've said, these attacks are coming at us multiple times a day. And the chances of someone falling for them, I would say, are very high. Eventually, to Rob's point, the eighth time, they'll get through. So if they really want you, they're going to keep trying to get you. So we'll discuss, some of the methods and some of the ways that you can really, aside from kind of being alert, really determine if something is a social engineering attack, whether it's business, your kids, personally, or whether or not it's your family. So let's take a quick break now. And when we come back, we will continue our conversation. So let's go to break now.
You're listening to My Connected Life with Tyler Cohen Wood. To reach the show during the live broadcast, please call in to 1-866-472-5788. That's 1-866-472-5788. You may also send an email to tyler@tylercohenwood.com. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to My Connected Life. I'm your host, Tyler Cohen Wood, and we are talking about social engineering. Now, while we were on a break, Rob, you started to tell a story that I think the audience would like to hear.
Sure. So I was literally this morning, I was having a conversation with a guy in New Zealand, and he was previously based in the UK, and he basically packed up his life in the UK and emigrated to New Zealand. But in doing so, cyber criminals moved in and took over part of his UK identity, and they knew where he used to live. And by piecing together, we were talking before the break about, people calling service providers. Yeah. If you can fool a utility company and you can break the system in order to get a copy of a utility bill, for example, this is part of the jigsaw that the criminals are putting together in order to do the things that they need to do to start to take on your identity. And it's horrendous. And talking to him about his journey was, horrible. But this is happening all the time. And
it's horrible. What can we do to protect ourselves? I mean, aside from taking a break, if you see something or someone's calling and there's urgency, trust, fear, think about that and walk away. That's something that I can think of. Having protections on your phone, your laptop. What are some other techniques that we can use to protect ourselves from clicking the link?
One that I always think about, and it's kind of sad, the world we live in, I tell everybody, trust no one. And I think about that from the perspective of maybe even my children. When I was a kid, I used to run outside and play in the woods and ride bikes, go anywhere, just tell my mom and dad, I'll be back before the sun sets or whatever. They didn't worry. I didn't worry. Today, I don't want my kids off the block, and we're looking out the window. You're checking the mobile phone. Did they text? So there's a different type of fear I think we have. So I think recognizing that if you receive a text, an email, a phone call, a letter in the mail, you kind of have to make the assumption that this is fraudulent or could be until I prove it otherwise. And it's a sad way to do it, but I think it's the only safe way. And it works. It allows you to go through a couple steps to kind of validate it in your mind. Is this a spoof? Is this real? Are they trying to steal my money, my identity, my credit card, my social security number, my whereabouts, whatever the case may be? But if we kind of think like a cyber criminal and we go through that psychological process in our brain and think it out carefully, it'll be somewhat of a protection. I don't like it. It's no way to live. That happened to me years ago when I was targeted myself and the company hacked. And I think that puts you in a different mindset. Same thing when I had my car stolen, or somebody had maybe their house was robbed, or they felt, somebody crossed that line. Once you have that happen, you tend to be a little bit more paranoid. And unfortunately, we're telling people if you're paranoid, you'll be safer. And to some degree, I believe that, because you won't go down that path and be fooled into clicking, divulging information, or giving in to the attacker.
So zero trust for your life.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's cold, but it does work, and it's maybe a protect. At least for myself, I can't say it works for everybody. For myself, it's a defense that's kept me safe in multiple situations when I look back at it, and I have gone through the path with others when I get phone calls or emails or conversations where they're going down the line and getting scammed. I'm amazed how far some people will go. And it's usually to this topic because they're socially engineered. Mm-hmm. Somebody leads them down that path of credibility because it maybe even seems too good to be true, but you tend to then almost believe in it and fool yourself. I'll give you a case in point. I've been helping a lot of friends, and I did an interview the other day about fake counterfeit postage stamps. Huge problem. It's sold on Facebook and Etsy and all these other places. And you can buy stamps for 20 to 50% discount. And that's pretty crazy, but they're mass produced in China. There's a fake e-commerce site. And what are they doing? They're really just trying to gather and steal credit card information and personal information from us. And who wants to put a 58-cent stamp to mail a letter or a bill or a postcard to somebody? And now if you look, wow, they must have bought in bulk. This is great. I get it for 24 cents. And that's what's happening. People are spending upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars on fake U.S. postage stamps that cost fractions of a penny. And it's hard to discern them with the visual eye. You have to have short-range ultraviolet light and a scanning machine at the postage facility to actually differentiate it. So you look at something like that, it's sold through what? Social media is the most common platform to sell fake postage. You see how appealing it is to people, and it fools them.
I think also, because I agree with you in terms of the trust piece. And sometimes when I'm giving talks and I say, just don't trust people, some people don't like that. Some people push back and go, we can't not trust people. And my message there is, well, look, if you can't take the I don't trust you, you've at least got to embrace being more skeptical. Yes. Be skeptical of every scenario. And there's definitely an education piece in this. We have to train more. I think there's a problem, however, and we've already talked about phishing and phishing tests. Marilise, you talked about a phishing test and how people had that awareness and yet they still fell for it. One of the problems, I believe, is company officers think, yes, we've got to do something, and think they've ticked the box. Mm-hmm. And they just haven't. And we've seen all sorts of problems. We've seen problems where people have overused fish threat type training. There was a case not so long ago where, a company was actively using fish threat so that phishing emails got sent out, but they were actually spoofed phishing emails. And the idea was if somebody did click on the link, they'd then get a training video. That's great if you use it very rarely. This company were overusing it, and what actually ended up, they created a culture where everybody thought that a suspect email was actually a training course, so they were clicking on the links, and they got this massive rise in ransomware and malware and so on. So there's that. And then the other thing is, look, phishing's not the only way you're going to be attacked.
Oh.
And back to the piece that we were talking about earlier, where we said that social engineers learn to mimic you. They mimic your interests, your style of speech, the phraseology that you use, to the airline example that you gave, Scott. People do that, but it's physical as well. They'll look at, well, how do you dress? How do people dress that work in your office? And one of my favorite examples is, social engineers wanting to hack your business. They want to get into your business, so they case the joint and they watch and they see who comes and goes. And one of the examples I always give is, every week you get the company that comes to change the sanitary bins in the ladies' toilets. They wear a uniform of some sort. Now, my question in any business is, if somebody dressed in the uniform of the company that you use to change the sanitary bins comes to the front door with fresh sanitary waste bins under their arms and rings the buzzer, who challenges them? And if that person is walking around the building, who challenges them? And I've never yet done a talk in an organization where honestly staff say, yeah, no, I would always stop the sanitary waste person to make sure they're legit. They don't.
I don't think I would stop them.
But
Unless
they
there
could be
was
carrying
something,
a USB key with malware on it. And
or in the sanitary bin.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they'd want to use it after that, but
And I think Rob makes a really valid point. And I think maybe the words I used were too harsh, even though it may be the way that I feel about trust. I like the way he mentions question.
yes.
So do you pose a question? When you tell somebody you don't trust them, or you clearly imply it based upon your line of reasoning and stop someone, they can get offended. However, if you question them and you do it carefully and say, oh, is today cleaning day? I haven't seen you here. It sparks a conversation, and that person may go, oh, and now suddenly their game is over, or their little tell comes out that you realize that they realize they might be caught. So I think using a good line of questioning and reasoning with them, engage with somebody. If it is a type of conversation, I do that on the phone. I find it amazing if a scam is starting, and I'll say, oh, I said, I'm so glad you called. I don't want to be a victim here. Yeah, I said, you know what? This is so important. Before I make a mistake or somebody accidentally hangs up on us, let me get your name and phone number. Hold on. Let me jot this down. Click. They hang up. Now, I wasn't offensive. And if the person was legitimate and real, that's probably something that they would divulge that information. So you can find balance maybe and pose question and use the questions as a means to really analyze, what's this person's intent? Are they legitimate? Is it real? And be careful too, because what I've noticed in a lot of the latest social scams, social engineering scams, is they mix it up where it's not just somebody talking, it's also tied to an email that has credible graphics, or they send you to a website and they happen to spoof. You're looking on your mobile phone, you see the number 1-800, bank XYZ. Oh, sir, you could simply validate my credentials. Go to www.bankxyz and you'll see the number there, and they could fool you. And now suddenly you divulge even more information than you normally would. So just be very slow to give out information and ask a series of questions. And that usually will slow them down because they're fast thinkers. And I think Rob mentioned earlier, it's a numbers game. You're one of 1,000 calls that day. So they're going to move on to the next one. They're not going to waste 30 seconds more than they have to if it's a phone scam or something like that. So I think the effective use of questions can really be a deterrent for taking it the next step or giving away a little bit more information than you should.
And I love that, Scott, because I think that also ties nicely in with the behavior that we promote, which is pause and think before you click, before you act. So stop and think before you act. And I think what's really interesting is Rob sort of alluded to the shortcomings in training and in many organizations when it comes to how, raising awareness and embedding that sort of secure culture in the organization. What we don't do is we don't actually help people with the actual behaviors that we want them to adopt. We ask them, or we highlight, look out for these things in the email, but we don't say, stop and think before you click, or if you suspect it, report it. And what we really have to start doing better is to help people and constantly remind people so that behavior becomes a habit. So doing the right thing becomes the automatic thing to do. And I think that's where we are completely failing at the moment as an industry.
I really agree with that point. I mean, I think that the cybersecurity awareness training, it's just got to change, and cybersecurity has just got to be part, at least a basic understanding of it has to be part of every job. But and I've said this before, I've noticed in presentations, and I've been working in the cybersecurity awareness arena for a really long time, whether it was part of my job or not. And one of the things that I've noticed is if you tell people, if you click this link, your company could get ransomware, they push next. But if you say, if you click this link, you could be inviting hackers into your home and they could have access to your daughter's video camera. It's the same techniques that you're going to use to protect yourself and your family that you're going to use to protect your business. And maybe personalizing the training a little bit more may be an effective solution.
Oh, absolutely. And it's really answering that question of what's in it for you. What is the so what in this? And of course, the context is different for different people. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge that, if we look at the psychology of the brain, we are speaking to the rational part of people's brains, the neurocortex. But what are the hackers targeting? They're targeting the emotional, the limbic system. They're targeting the amygdala, the feeling part of our brain. So it's a complete mismatch. And that's exactly to your point, Tyler. The feeling part is, what if this puts your daughter or your child in danger? And so we're absolutely missing a trick. What's a really interesting statistic is that there's 10 seconds between someone opening an email and clicking on a phishing link. And this tells us that people don't even have time to read the email, let alone go through all the checks that we ask them to do, right? So it's the auto response part of the brain, so the feeling part, the limbic system, the amygdala part of the brain that's actually responding and clicking. It's not the conscious part of the brain. So yeah, really fascinating stuff.
Interesting. So if we waited maybe 20 seconds, would that kind of change it to the more rational part of the brain?
Well, it means that you'll have that moment to stop and think. I have a completely unrelated example, but just before we went on holiday recently, it was days before our flight and South Africa was still on the red list. And so we were this close to cancelling our holiday. And we were literally on the phone to BA, and BA was about to change our flights. And then it was going to cost us a lot of money. And then I said to Jaime, let's just think about this. And I spent literally 5 minutes sat there doing absolutely nothing. And I got the perspective, I got calm. And all I said to him is, we're not changing anything. We're getting on that plane. and we'll figure it out from there. And then South Africa was removed from the red list. But it was such a classic example of just taking that moment to pause, to breathe, and to just think rationally about what's going on here. But of course we don't have time. Back to your earlier point about stress, about, you know, running around like mad headless chickens, you know, we just go, and we just never take that moment to stop, and then throw into the mix the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails that you get. You know, it's just such a maze.
I think you could also use technique. One that I've used, it might work for some of the listeners. I get a little more than 1,000 emails a day, juggling 4 emails accounts. It's overwhelming many times. When I come in the morning, I'll have a cup of coffee and I'll quick scan my emails, and ones that look like they're a purchase order, financial related, this and that, I like to try to investigate them, as pathetic as that sounds, to make sure it's not a scam. So I'll actually flag them. So I have a little red flag through my email, and I'll click a bunch of, so it's 10 suspect ones. Later on, when I have time, I go back and I actually check the raw headers and look and see where it came from. Is it spoofed? Is it real? And as you do that each day, you start to train yourself to quickly learn, nope, scam. And 9 out of 10 of them are scam. But every once in a while, there's a real one in there, and say, wow, that looked like a scam and it's a legitimate order. I'm glad that I took the time when I had a clear head and did it, as opposed to just jumping in there, click, 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 as you're distracted, drinking your coffee, answering the phone. So I think to your point, I like that fact about the time. Don't be such a rush. We're told we have to do X number of things in a day within this set amount of time. Sometimes we have to say, well, no, I can't. Or I'll do that later when I have a clear moment to concentrate on this, because it is important. And most email is not that important. That's part of the problem. I think it's information overload. I think the same thing. I don't check my mail anymore at home. I get it from the mailbox and I just put it on the counter. I walk away from it. It's too much information for me to dissect. And I usually trust my wife to go through it. And that's kind of sad, but there's too much stuff that we have to do in a day. So I think taking out the appropriate time for things that we deem more important or need to be more secure is important, and helps us to sort through and not fall victim.
There's two thoughts that I've had on this. One is, actually, I just need to be giving staff old equipment that's slower, and I'll save myself
That's brilliant.
whole heap of money.
Brilliant.
The time delay.
You've got to thought that one through, Rob.
Windows NT or Windows 98.
but the other thought was listening to Scott and his process of going through the email. And one of the things that I often think is, you do that, Scott, and you know why you do it. Yeah. And obviously it pays dividends, and that's great. I think one of the other problems that we have is that we do stuff in our businesses and we put stuff in place, and we don't spend enough time explaining to people why we're doing it. Yeah. And why this is important. And again, to your point, Tyler, when you're doing cyber security education, make it personal, make it about the audience's children, and all of a sudden you've got their attention. I completely agree with that, and I use that tactic. But so many things, it's like it's really easy to put on a header to an email to say, this email is not an internal email, it's come from outside the organization. Companies turn that on without ever telling their staff why they're doing it. And then they get bombarded with complaints saying, now my email's really, really wordy, please can we turn it off? And yet if they'd explained it, they would have had more buy-in and more acceptance, and that would have been a useful tool. So I think it's really important that we always remember the why in our messaging and the delivery of, whether it's training or tools or methods. That's essential.
Yeah, the why first, but then also the how, because I think what we also lazy and don't do particularly well is actually to say to people, this is the right way to do it. We just sort of say, oh no, you've done this wrong, and this is why, but then we fail to actually give them the solution. So it's the complete piece. Yeah.
Yes, agreed.
That's such a great point, is making sure that everyone has the same solution, because imagine not being a cybersecurity professional and you're inundated with this stuff. I mean, it really is hard, but you know, some of the things we've talked about, take a little bit more time to look at the email, check the link, see where it's going before you click on it. And you know, also, I kind of like what you said, Scott, about having your wife kind of go through emails. Have a buddy system, a cybersecurity buddy. If you think something's suspicious, hey, Scott, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think that's really good, because somebody that's a third party, and it could be somebody you're related to, it could be a trusted friend. I have several friends that they're in the world of business, but they're not in cybersecurity. And I get texts from them, phone calls. This week, I think I've had 4 different questions just from colleagues. And I've learned it's important for me to stop and take the time to answer, listen to it, because it's also partly I'm learning from their misfortunes in hopes that I can help other people. And that's really important. The ability to share information amongst one another as colleagues, but also to business owners, to consumers, so people get it. I think collectively, that's a lot of power to fight back against the cyber criminals when we work together and communicate, because telling stories of my screw ups in the past, and people get a chuckle when I speak, it actually works well, because they say, okay, it happened to this guy. He's supposedly an expert here, but even him it happened to. So I guess I got to be more careful too. Bring it down to reality and relate to them. And I think that's important.
You know, you could even make it into a game with your kids too, because these are important things that they need to understand as well.
Yeah.
Not to click on these links. So yeah, so I think that we've covered quite a bit here. Does anyone have any other points they want to kind of end with? We'll start with you, Marilise.
I really wanted to, and the whole time I've been thinking about this at the sort of back of my mind, but this idea that, you know, when you check your emails first thing in the morning, you're kind of a slave to other people's agendas. And I teach this a lot in my productivity training as a high performance coach. And I couldn't help but think about that in the sense that when we just get straight into that in the mornings and we're in kind of firefighting mode, we're on other people's agendas. So I'm thinking, actually, can we also help people to be more resilient and to be more productive by actually saying to them, what is that sort of first thing you do in the morning, the first hour of your day, and how do you set yourself up to be the best you for the day? I know this is a bit left field, but I just sort of wanted to get that out there.
I love that. Thank you for that. We just have a little bit of time. Rob, do you have anything else that you'd like to add in 3 seconds?
Yeah, I think be skeptical and be aware that you're being scammed in all aspects of your life. And it's not just online, it's not just digital, it could be physical too.
That's great. Scott, anything to add?
Just in 2 seconds, be a hacker. Try it for an hour, try it for a day, and try to think like a hacker. As you do that and try to fool your friends in an innocent way, you'll appreciate what to look out for even more.
Oh, I'm going to have so much fun doing that.
Just not to me.
Thank you all so much for being here. This was such a great episode. And listen next time. Next week, we'll have another episode of My Connected Life. This is your host, Tyler Cohen Wood. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for tuning in this week to My Connected Life. We have much more for you next Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific on the Voice America Variety Channel. Until our next show, be careful with your data and your life.